Welcome to the Becoming Aware podcast, where I, Genevieve Faulkner, share what I'm becoming aware of.
Hello and welcome to the Becoming Aware podcast. My name is Genevieve Faulkner, your host, and if you're watching this on YouTube, hi. So today I wanted to talk about the parent trap. So what I mean by that is the way in which we will limit ourselves, limit what we can create based upon the belief systems or the emotional energy that we've suppressed with regards to one or more of our parents. So this is something that, doing sessions for people, a lot of the time when they're not achieving what they want to achieve, this is part of the reason why they haven't been willing to create fully beyond or be who they are beyond the paradigm that they were placed in as children or the relationship that they've had with one or more of their parents. So there's a lot of elements to this that I could talk about. I want to talk about it from the place of when we first get here, because this reality is weird. The way in which it's set up, like we are beings that have so much capacity, so much energy, so much ability to function beyond time, space, reality, dimensions, like all over the place. Like we are like just so powerful and we choose to be here. But when we choose to be here and we go through that process of, choosing our parents and having our body be created and then merging our energy with our mothers as we go through the birthing process and then kind of like, merging even more the first couple of years to make sure that our bodies survive here. That process creates this strange thing where it's almost like we go through it to completely forget who we are, right? Like we disconnect over time with our source energy and our ability to know everything that we know and all of the energetic capacities that we have. And part of the reason why I think that happens, maybe there's all sorts of rules and regulations that have been put in place with regards to this dimension. But I do think that it happens because we kind of like assimilate to the people that we are around when we get here. So meaning that, we start out knowing like that we've got all of this capacity, but then over time, the more we're in our families, the more we start to, a lot of the time, become more like them. And the sad thing about that is that they've gone through this same process. They've gone through the same cycle, meaning that they have so much power, so much capacity, so much awareness, so many like energetic abilities that are perhaps not recognized or acknowledged that they've disconnected from and separated from to assimilate and be like whoever they grew up with, right? How insane is that? Like it's so wild. So what happens throughout that process when that's the way things are structured and someone's not willing to be who they are or connect with themselves and acknowledge who they are beyond that paradigm that parents and people getting trained into in families, is the pattern just repeats over and over again. When someone's willing to start to actually acknowledge who they are, a whole different reality opens up. A doorway opens up into a different space where they get to actually become more of them and use the capacities they have to their advantage so that they can create their reality. But in that process, they actually show everyone around them what they also have the ability to choose. And so sometimes choosing to go beyond the paradigm that you've been in with regards to your family or with regards to your parents is the greatest gift that you can give them. They may not see it like that when they're functioning from the limited version of who they think they are in this reality, but them as beings will get that on some level at some point in time, in some space. So how do you know if you are limiting yourself based upon your parents? So there's this element of some people will often there can be this element of family functioning a little bit cult-like for some people. I mentioned last week, I was talking about the cult of patriarchy, which I feel like this ties into. And what I'm talking to with regards to this is often kind of like in generations back. So it may not be your own family dynamic, but if you look back at your grandparents, you might see some things with regards to their relationship or the way that they functioned in family that you may be being influenced by, that you may not realize, because you've taken on that programming within your body, within your DNA, right? And so sometimes because of that, the experience of merging with your mother, when we go through difficult experiences, we can create trauma, which creates a stopping point, like it creates a freeze moment. And some people can have these freeze moments in childhood where they, have decided it's not safe to move forward. And so a part of them fragments off and stays in the time and space and the reality of that age and that childhood. And so for those like before 2, like sometimes they can have this, if they've had trauma before 2, they can have this element of not knowing the difference between who they are and their mother. And so they can be trying to create their own reality, yet at the same time be influenced and limited by all the things that their mother hasn't moved beyond, right? Because that's how this works. When you aren't able to recognize who you are beyond any member of your family or anyone else, you end up being immersed in their reality and creating your reality from their reality and not from your source energy. So it can create a lot of frustration when you're doing this, because you might have all of this awareness in your head about all the things you know are possible for you, and yet physically it's like you just can't bring it into reality. This is why, because you've taken on too much of other people's realities and you are not acknowledging your own creative capacities enough. So another reason why sometimes this happens is when families have like if you've grown up in a kind of high control family, like where one member was perhaps highly controlling and they needed to be the authority figure, they needed that power, they needed to feel superior. What happens in that situation is everyone in the family, it functions a little bit more like a cult. And everybody in the family learns to centralize this controlling figure, right? This authority figure, the one in charge. And so they will start to create their entire reality to make sure this person is okay with what they're choosing, to validate that they are the superior one, that they are the powerful one, to keep the peace so that there's no kind of, disruption. And so when somebody's grown up with something like that, they often will unconsciously merge with other people when they create relationships. And that creates this inability, again, to create their reality, because in the merging, in the way that they're doing it from a space of fawning, which is a trauma response, it's actually giving up their power, and it's making the other person's reality more powerful, more dominant, because it's a survival mechanism. The other element of that is that when there's that control figure, what controlling people like to do is they, particularly when it's a controlling parent, is they'll use this kind of gaslighting technique where they will be saying that they're doing something for the person's own good because the other person will get it wrong. The other person can't do it by themselves, that kind of thing. And so as time goes on, someone who's grown up in that kind of dynamic begins to believe that is true. And it creates this kind of place where they don't fully recognize the capacity that they have, the awareness that they have. They don't have the ability to fully trust themselves to make good decisions because they've been entrained to believe that the parent has to be the one that, makes the best decisions. And with that fawning process, if somebody has that superior need, to be the powerful one, in that fawning process, you'll become the inferior one to make them happy. So that can be part of what is creating, you kind of like giving up too much of your power and getting lost in family dynamics that create you being trapped by their realities. Another element can be the projections that are projected onto people. So for people that grew up in families where they weren't, perhaps the emotions, the energy wasn't acknowledged a lot, and it was more just, just nothing was talked about, then there can be all sorts of projections that are projected at people, all of the time. Yeah, we're all constantly kind of projecting things. Projections are actually the points of view that we have that we're then projecting onto the other person. So when we're doing that, we're actually talking about ourselves or what we believe to be true, but that's nothing to do with the other person. And so when a parent has had a lot of projections onto a child, and sometimes they can be good projections or sometimes they can be bad, that if the child isn't acknowledging, okay, this is the parent's projection and this is nothing to do with me, this is about their own reality, then they can take that projection on unconsciously and it can limit what they're creating. So with the projections, there can be all sorts of expectations as well. If a parent has gone through that process of really giving up on themselves, self-abandoning to, merge with everybody around them in childhood or for whatever reason, they can project all sorts of things onto their child about the dreams that they had, wanting their children to achieve their dreams instead of, letting the child choose for themselves. And so that can create all sorts of elements of a person feeling guilty for choosing for themselves or for living, the dream that they want to live. And so it creates this internal conflict that doesn't allow the physical manifestation to occur with as much ease. There can also be an element of, in more narcissistic families, there can be an element of the projections being ones of the shadow side of the parent. So everything that the parent didn't want to deal with, didn't want to address in themselves, they may project onto the child so that they don't have to see it in themselves. They get to be the good, perfect, correct one, and the child is the problem, right? And so people that have gone through that kind of experience, if they're not functioning from their awareness, they're going to take on that identity and then create their reality from that identity and not from the true power of themselves. So what else? Is there anything else here that I wanted to mention with this? The other thing is, like, one of the things that, as I've mentioned with regards to, people having this wounding throughout childhood that can create these stopping points. Our parents have gone through that too. No one gets out of childhood completely unscathed. So it might be that there's things that happened in your parents' childhood that they haven't fully moved through. They haven't shifted that energy for whatever reason. It's important to acknowledge those things, because what can happen when you're a parent and you've had those kinds of freeze points is we can unconsciously have the point of view that our children are younger than us, right? Yet if we've had this trauma experience where part of us is frozen at 15, for example, then the child has to stay younger than 15 to be our child, right? So there can be this weird type thing that can happen unconsciously sometimes where people will stagnate their own growth and not allow themselves to be something greater than their parent, because as they get to the same age their parent was, it starts to create friction. When someone's got that wounding, and if they're not willing to actually go within and actually move that energy and release whatever needs to be released, as I mentioned, there will be judgments that come up. And the judgments are the protection or the defense mechanism, so they don't have to address what's within. But that means they start projecting and judging the child that they have. And when that occurs, if the child isn't strong enough within to, or aware enough to acknowledge, okay, my parent here is like functioning from some sort of trauma and they haven't moved through it, so I'm just going to allow myself to grow up, they will resist growing up because they're afraid of the attack or the judgment, the energy that gets directed at them if they actually be beyond that trauma point. So there can be all sorts of different elements with regards to the parent-child relationship. And for some of you, like watching this, it might be triggering things within your world with regards to your own childhood, or ways in which perhaps you can see there may be elements still that like you need to shift to have more ease and power to create your reality. There may also be some of you that are able to connect to elements that you can change with your own children, and the way in which you are being with them. So one of the greatest gifts I think that we can be to our children is, be willing to actually look at what it is that we're holding on to, what it is that we're carrying, and heal whatever parts of us need healing, so that we're not creating those stopping points within us, so that we can be like this guide or this kind of like facilitator for them to move through life with ease, without projecting the things that are kind of like unresolved or unfinished for us. So that's one of my targets anyway. So what can you do? What can you do to create ease for yourself? So first of all, you want to, like, with regards to like, if you are somebody that did have a controlling parent and you learned to kind of like not trust yourself, start to pay attention to the choices that you make that have turned out really well. So you want to start to develop that muscle to really trust yourself, because as you build that over time, it will start to dismantle the aftermath of the gaslighting that has created the uncertainty. If you are noticing that there's elements of you kind of like being stuck at a younger age because your parent went through some sort of trauma and you haven't moved beyond them, acknowledge that you are actually an infinite being. Acknowledge that you have power, capacity, awareness that is beyond the physical body that you're in. Yes, you are their child because you're genetically, your body has been created through the genes that are tied to them. But as beings that have had many lifetimes, that are like that kind of like function way beyond what our minds are often willing to comprehend. Like, if you look at that, do you actually believe that you are their child, right? Like, as beings, when you start to integrate and function more from the energy of your being, there can be this shift in the energy with regards to family relationships. Because on one hand, yes, we're all here to have the physical experience of being part of a family. And on the other, you kind of got to be able, if you want to be able to manifest things well, you've got to be able to hold both realities at once. So on one hand, being, their daughter or son. On the other hand, acknowledging that you are a being that doesn't actually, all of the roles are kind of like just this lifetime, and there's so much more available to you. And when you function from that space and give yourself permission to be that, you don't have to keep yourself stuck at a younger age, because you have the ability to be the energies that perhaps you've needed that have created that kind of wounding or that stuckness. So when you're able to kind of like bring more of your being here and acknowledge that being, those parts of you that are stuck can dissolve, they can integrate, they can move into the space of oneness with the rest of you. Something else that can create a bit more ease is asking yourself why you chose this life, why you chose your parents. Because one of the traps of like the reality that we're in with regards to parents or one of the ways we trap ourselves is by judging them. So when we go into judgment of them, we're separating from them. And in that separation, we're basically saying that we're nothing like them, right? Yet from a higher dimension, we are all oneness. So when you're not willing to actually acknowledge the parts of you that are like them, you can actually then not kind of like see the ways in which you are limiting yourself that is the same as the way that they've limited themselves. So you've got to be willing to kind of like see things from a higher picture in order to set yourself free. And the way in which to do that is to ask yourself why you chose them. Because yes, there might be all sorts of limitations within the structure of what it is that you've taken on within your family. Some of you might be healers and you chose the family for that reason because you want to end the patterns. But there is also many, many, many great capacities within the information within DNA. And so it might be that you chose the parents that you chose because there's all sorts of cool capacities that you have or abilities that you have now because you're part of that line. So it's important to acknowledge both the good and the bad, not kind of like get like, fixated on one and then kind of like stuck in a negative cycle. So that can assist you to set yourself free a little bit. And also like, just kind of like really kind of like acknowledging that other people's triggering is not your responsibility. So allowing yourself to actually like giving yourself permission to really choose what is going to light you up, what is going to expand your world, what is going to excite you and bring like a greater reality to you. You know, having that, giving yourself permission for that and acknowledging that that is going to trigger people, but acknowledging that is something that is actually just bringing up information that's already within people's fields. Like if you're triggering someone, you're triggering something that's already there. That's not unkind. That's giving them the opportunity for growth, because if they know that it's there, they actually have the ability to be present with themselves and do something to change it if they want to. Okay, so that's helpful. In a weird way, that's helpful. It's not always seen that way in this world, but it is actually helpful. So if you can see things from that point of view and acknowledge like, okay, no one's reactions are my problem. Like no one's triggering is my problem. It's okay for me to be me. I'm going to give myself the space to be me in the world and choose what actually is going to create greater for myself. And it's okay for people to not be okay with that, right? Just allowing them to have their reality, them to choose whatever they're going to choose in the time frame that they can choose it or not choose it. You know, not everyone's here to have the same experiences. Not everyone has the same desire for growth or expansion. Some people are here for very different reasons. So it's kind of important to honor that. The more you can honor that and not have any kind of expectation of anyone having to get you, that's what is kind of kind to them and also kind to you, right? Because it lets you actually be you and choose what works for you. So another thing you can do is ask yourself, like, what are the parts of me that I can acknowledge that my parents never have? Okay, because when you get entrained into that paradigm as kids and you slowly give yourself up for their reality, that's what you're doing. You're separating from all of the different parts of you that you are beyond their reality that they don't want to see because it's, you know, going to trigger too much, right? And so if you can start to develop the capacity again to connect to those parts, to celebrate those parts, to look at how you can begin to use those energies or abilities, that begins to set you free from the trap of somebody else's reality, of your parents' reality, or of what they experienced or what they projected onto you. So letting go of any need. Sometimes like people can have this kind of like need of their parents getting them, right? And in that, they've given that control over to their parents. And their power over to their parents, because the parent can decide whether or not they're going to actually give them that acknowledgement. And if they're more invested in like, or valuing control than anything else, then they're not going to give their kid what they want, because if they do, then they don't have that control over them anymore, right? So one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself is the willingness to actually choose to acknowledge you and be you, regardless of what anybody else thinks of you and regardless of what anybody else is going to see of you. Okay, if they're not willing to acknowledge you, if they're not willing to see what it is that you have the capacity to be, that's not about you. That is about the reality that they didn't choose for themselves and how they feel about that choice, right? That they don't want to address and look at because it's too painful, it's too much, it's too difficult. Or it's about some other relationship thing that's already occurred, right? That's within their subconscious. It's not usually about you, okay? Yeah, and then also the other thing that you can do is really acknowledge their journeys, right? Because if you acknowledge the bigger picture of, okay, they chose this life and they were entrained into all of this based upon the generation that they were in and everything that they experienced at that time, it can sometimes create the dismantling of the places and spaces where you're kind of like sticking yourself in being the effect of whatever it is that they experienced. So having compassion, you know, acknowledging that perhaps times were different then, they didn't have the same possibilities, they didn't have the same choices. It can assist you to get out of the space of judgment, which is where you trap yourself in their reality. And you know, again, like it gives you the permission to choose what you can choose because you have more choices available now than perhaps they had back then, right? So I hope all of this assists you guys to have some awareness about how to shift and change some stuff for yourself. If you do want to do a deep dive on this, you are more than welcome to book sessions with me or come to a theta healing class. This is what we do. We explore, you know, the subconscious, like, and what is within the subconscious, what we're holding on to that is limiting us really acknowledging who we are and having that full power to manifest the reality we'd like to manifest. So if you're interested in that, you can check out the link somewhere connected to this. If there is any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if there's anything you'd like me to do a video about, let me know. Just leave a comment and I'll do my best. So thanks for listening, guys. I'm very grateful and have a good day.